Hey class, this is the orientation for the fourth week of the spring of 2023. I hope everybody got through the mess last week okay. It was crazy, especially in Austin. My brother lives in Austin, and it was awful there. And I guess north of San Antonio as well, but I'm sure it was terrible in the hill country too. Anyway, I hope you're okay. And what I want to talk about in this brief orientation is that what you'll be learning about this week. The first thing you'll be learning about is the last convulsive, bloody decades of Spanish rule in Texas, which ends in 1821. There's a revolution in Spanish Mexico, which of course includes Texas, that begins in 1811 and ends in 1821 with the defeat of the Spanish and the creation of the Mexican Republic. And Texas is very much part of that revolution. But as you'll find out in the podcast, Texas, what happens in the Spanish maintain control in Texas until 1821. And you have the bloodiest battle in all of Texas history, the Battle of Medina in 1813, which is just outside of San Antonio. Which, if you're heading south towards Laredo, it's just around the city limits. No one knows exactly for sure, although some archaeologists have found some bullets there. 1,000 people were killed in that battle. It was really more of a massacre. The Spanish come up and defeat the revolutionaries. So, yeah, it's very, very intense period, the last 2 decades of Spanish rule. And as I'll talk about in great detail, by 1820, Texas is depopulated. I have a figure in front of me if you're looking at your screen. By 1820, there are 167,000 Americans in Louisiana and 220,000 in Mississippi and Alabama. So by 1820, there's in the states that neighbor Spanish Texas, which will quickly become Mexican Texas, the U.S. states that neighbor this region, there's 400,000 Americans. Anglo, and then of course many enslaved as well, who are working cotton. During that same period, there's only about between 3,500 and 4,000 Tejanos in all of Texas. So when you compare Spanish Texas and then in 1821 Mexican Texas to the states east of here, the U.S. states east of here, well, there's no comparison. It's basically at most 4,000 Tejanos versus 400,000 Americans. And this kind of sets up why Texas is going to be lost to Mexico in 1836 and later join the Union in 1845. But that's a story that I'm going to tell over the next couple of weeks. I just want you to get a sense of just what kind of terrible shape Texas is in by 1820, by the end of the Spanish period, and how miserably the Spanish had failed to populate this region. Although, of course, as I've said many times, the legacy of Spain remains in Texas. Now, the other quick thing that I want to show you is a map, and I put this map, it's on Blackboard, and I can't tell you how important it is to look at these maps if you want to understand this course. It just makes life so much easier. By the way, this is a week where it probably makes more sense to listen to the podcast before you do the readings. The readings will supplement the podcast. So this is Mexico in 1824, and I'm going to go into this in detail, but just note that Texas by 1824 is part of what's the largest state in Mexico at the time, which is Coahuila y Tejas. But I'm going to talk about this towards the end of my lecture today. So, big story, we're moving into the Mexican period of Texas history, which begins in 1821 and lasts until 1836. But the other thing we're gonna get into today, towards the end of today's lecture, the door to Anglos is open by about the very last years of Spanish rule and the beginning of Mexican rule in Texas. The Spanish and then the Mexicans are desperate for population here. They need help, especially with the Comanche. They're hoping that Anglos that come into Texas will become good Spanish or later Mexican citizens. And of course, the Anglos that come in bring in their slave, because this is another important point that you need to realize and be cognizant of. What's happening in the 1820s, by the end of today's lecture, is Texas is becoming part of the global cotton economy, because as Anglos come in with their enslaved, with their captive workers who are African American, Texas in the 1820s, you start seeing the growth of cotton, the cultivation of cotton in Texas for the first time. You really didn't have much cotton grown in Texas, very little, until the 1820s. It was mostly a ranching economy. So in the 1820s, Texas gains a new population of Anglo-Americans and their enslaved workers. And the Texas economy becomes part of the larger global cotton economy. So that's a big shift. That's a big shift that's going to happen this week. It happens towards the end of today's lecture. So the first part of the lecture talks about the last decades of Spanish rule. And then the last part of the lecture talks about the very beginnings of Mexican rule in Texas, and the Anglos, especially Moses Austin and Stephen F. Austin, who were given permission to come into Texas. So I'll stop it at that. Just big picture. Be sure to look at the maps. I always test students on borders. I talk about how the border with Louisiana is created, the border with Oklahoma is created. You need to know about Coahuila, Tejas, but I talk about that in detail. And I shouldn't really go too much into the weeds in these orientations, because it's just confusing for you. I just want to give you kind of the big picture of what you're going to confront this week before the first midterm. As always, any questions or concerns, something's happened in your life that I need to know about, not because I'm prying into your life, but it's hurt your grade and you think I can help you, please get in touch with me. You know where my email is. It's on the syllabus. Yeah, anything as we come up to midterm one. Any concerns or issues, please get in touch with me.